On a tense and storm-heavy night in Genoa City, the power struggle between the NEWMAN and ABBOTT families reached a breaking point, sending shockwaves through everyone connected to them. For years, the rivalry between Victor NEWMAN and Jack ABBOTT had simmered with dangerous intensity, but this time the stakes felt different, more personal, more volatile, and potentially more destructive than ever before. At the center of the crisis stood Billy ABBOTT and Nikki NEWMAN, two unlikely allies who suddenly found themselves united by a single mission: save Jack before Victor's escalating vendetta spiraled completely out of control. The situation began earlier that week when whispers spread through the halls of Jabbo and NEWMAN Enterprises that Victor had launched a quiet but devastating operation designed to dismantle Jack's life piece by piece. Financial pressure, mysterious legal threats, and shadowy business maneuvers began appearing everywhere Jack turned. At first, Jack believed it was simply another round in the long corporate chess match he and Victor had been playing for decades. But Billy quickly sensed something darker brewing. Billy had seen his fair share of Victor's ruthless tactics, but the clues this time pointed to something much more dangerous than corporate sabotage. The night Billy discovered the truth started with a cryptic message from one of his contacts inside NEWMAN Enterprises, warning him that Victor had gone beyond business and was planning something that could ruin Jack permanently. Billy refused to believe Victor would cross that line, at least not without provocation, but the deeper he dug, the more disturbing the evidence became. Meanwhile, Nikki was dealing with her own growing concerns about Victor's increasingly erratic behavior. Having spent years by his side, she knew better than anyone when the powerful NEWMAN patriarch was slipping into one of his dangerously obsessive moods. Victor had always been protective of his family and fiercely competitive in business, but recently his fixation on destroying Jack had taken on a new intensity. Nikki noticed the signs: the late-night strategy meetings, the sudden secrecy, the cold determination in Victor's voice whenever Jack's name was mentioned. When she confronted him about it, Victor dismissed her worries, insisting that everything he was doing was necessary to protect the NEWMAN legacy. But Nikki couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was losing perspective, allowing his hatred to override his judgment. The turning point came when Billy approached Nikki with the shocking information he had uncovered. At first, Nikki was skeptical of Billy's claims. After all, Billy and Victor had clashed countless times, and it wouldn't be the first time emotions had clouded Billy's interpretation of events. But as Billy laid out the pieces, financial transfers, private security arrangements, and a mysterious property Victor had recently acquired outside Genoa City, Nikki's skepticism slowly turned into alarm. The implications were chilling. If Billy's suspicions were correct, Victor wasn't just trying to defeat Jack in the boardroom, he was setting a trap designed to isolate him completely. Determined to get answers, Nikki confronted Victor again, pressing him about the strange developments surrounding Jack. Victor's response only deepened her fears. Instead of offering reassurance, he brushed off her questions with an icy warning that Jack ABBOTT had crossed too many lines and was finally going to pay the price. Nikki realized in that moment that Victor was no longer thinking rationally. Whatever he had planned was already in motion, and stopping it might be nearly impossible. That realization pushed Nikki into an unexpected alliance with Billy. Despite their complicated history and mutual distrust, they both understood the gravity of the situation. Jack's safety, and perhaps Victor's own future, hung in the balance. Billy proposed a risky plan: track Victor's operation, find Jack before the trap was sprung, and intervene before things escalated beyond repair. Nikki hesitated at first. Turning against Victor, even temporarily, meant betraying the man she loved. But she also knew that if Victor crossed the line into something irreversible, the consequences would devastate everyone involved, including Victor himself. The next 24 hours became a frantic race against time. Billy and Nikki worked quietly but urgently, following a trail of clues that led them through Genoa City's business circles and into Victor's carefully guarded inner network. Along the way they encountered resistance from Victor's loyal associates, who were clearly under strict orders to keep the details of his plan secret. Every step forward revealed just how elaborate Victor's strategy had become. He had orchestrated a situation in which Jack would be lured into a private negotiation under the false belief that it could end their feud once and for all. But Billy quickly realized the meeting was nothing more than a setup designed to corner Jack without witnesses or allies. As the pieces fell into place, Billy's determination hardened. For all their differences, Jack was still his brother, and he refused to let Victor destroy him. Nikki, meanwhile, struggled with the emotional weight of the situation. She understood Victor's relentless drive better than anyone, and part of her feared that intervening might only provoke him further. Yet the thought of Victor crossing a moral line he could never return from was even more terrifying. As night fell over Genoa City, Billy and Nikki finally traced Victor's operation to a secluded estate on the outskirts of town, the same mysterious property Billy had discovered earlier. Security around the estate was tight, confirming their worst fears that something significant was about to happen. Inside, Jack had already arrived, unaware of the danger waiting for him. Victor had arranged the meeting under the pretense of discussing a final resolution to their endless rivalry. But as the conversation began, it quickly became clear that Victor had no intention of making peace. Years of resentment poured out in a tense exchange between the two titans, each accusing the other of betrayal, manipulation, and unforgivable ambition. Victor believed Jack had repeatedly interfered with his family and his business empire, while Jack argued that Victor's obsession with control had poisoned everything he touched. The confrontation grew increasingly heated, the tension thick enough to feel like a storm about to break. Outside the estate gates, Billy and Nikki raced to find a way inside before the situation exploded. Billy managed to bypass part of the security system while Nikki distracted one of Victor's guards, buying them just enough time to slip onto the property. As they approached the main house, raised voices from inside confirmed that Jack and Victor were already locked in a dangerous confrontation. Billy burst through the door just as Victor issued a chilling ultimatum that stunned everyone in the room. For a moment, silence hung in the air as Victor turned to see Nikki standing beside Billy. The shock in his eyes quickly hardened into anger. Victor demanded to know why Nikki had betrayed him, while Billy declared that he wouldn't allow Victor to destroy his brother out of pure vengeance. The emotional intensity of the moment forced everyone to confront the truth. The feud between the Newmans and Abbotts had finally reached a point where someone had to step back, or everything would be lost. Nikki's voice trembled as she pleaded with Victor to stop before he did something he would regret forever. She reminded him of the man he used to be, the man who fought to build a family and protect the people he loved. Victor remained silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable as the weight of Nikki's words settled over the room. Jack watched carefully, knowing that whatever Victor decided next could change the course of their lives forever. Billy stood ready to defend his brother if necessary, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as Victor's carefully controlled facade began to crack. For the first time in years, Victor NEWMAN looked like a man standing on the edge of losing control. Whether Nikki and Billy had arrived in time to stop him, or whether their intervention would only push him further into darkness, remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. The battle between the NEWMAN and Abbott families had reached a turning point, and Genoa City would never be the same once the dust finally settled. The tension inside the secluded estate felt almost suffocating as the four figures stood locked in a moment that seemed suspended in time. Victor NEWMAN slowly turned his gaze from Nikki NEWMAN to Billy Abbott and finally toward Jack Abbott, the man who had been both his fiercest rival and his most persistent adversary for decades. The storm outside rumbled softly in the distance, a low echo of the emotional thunder building inside the room. For Victor, this confrontation had been inevitable. Years of betrayal, competition, and bitter resentment had finally converged in one place, and he had intended to end it on his terms. Yet the sudden arrival of Nikki and Billy had disrupted the carefully calculated scenario he had planned, forcing him to face something he rarely tolerated, uncertainty. Jack stood near the large wooden desk in the center of the room, his expression guarded but resolute. He had walked into the meeting expecting another round of Victor's usual intimidation tactics, perhaps a corporate ultimatum or a dramatic threat about Jabbo's future. Instead, the conversation had turned into something much more personal, a brutal excavation of every wound the two men had inflicted on each other over the years. Victor's accusations had come fast and cold, describing Jack as a manipulator who hid behind charm and respectability while secretly plotting against the NEWMAN empire. Jack had fired back just as fiercely, accusing Victor of ruling through fear and treating every relationship like a strategic weapon. Neither man had been willing to yield, and the argument had escalated until it felt less like a negotiation and more like a declaration of war. Now, with Billy and Nikki present, the energy in the room shifted again. Billy stepped closer to his brother, placing himself firmly between Jack and Victor as if daring the NEWMAN patriarch to make another move. Billy's voice carried a mix of anger and disbelief when he spoke. He demanded to know how far Victor had been willing to go tonight. The financial attacks, the surveillance, the isolation tactics. Billy had uncovered enough to realize Victor had engineered a situation where Jack could be completely cut off from allies and resources. Whether Victor intended to ruin Jack financially or something even darker remained unclear, but Billy had not taken the risk lightly. Nikki watched the confrontation with a deep ache in her chest. She knew Victor better than anyone, and she recognized the look in his eyes, the intense focus, the rigid control, the refusal to back down once he believed he was justified. That determination had built his empire, but it had also destroyed countless relationships along the way. Nikki had spent years trying to temper that side of him, reminding him that power meant nothing if it cost him the people he loved. Tonight, however, Victor seemed dangerously close to forgetting that lesson entirely. "Victor," Nikki said softly, her voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't you. Not the man I know." Victor's expression hardened. He insisted that everything he had done was necessary, that Jack had repeatedly attacked his family and his company and had finally forced his hand. In Victor's mind, this confrontation wasn't revenge, it was justice. Jack, however, responded with a bitter laugh that echoed across the room. He pointed out that Victor had always justified his actions the same way, claiming to defend his family while crushing anyone who dared challenge him. Billy's patience finally snapped. He reminded Victor that no one in Genoa City believed the feud was about protecting family anymore. It had become something else entirely, an obsession between two powerful men who refused to admit they had gone too far. Victor's eyes flashed with fury at Billy's words, but before he could respond, Nikki stepped forward again. She told Victor that she had seen where this path led before. Years ago, his relentless pursuit of control had nearly cost him everything: his family, his marriage, even his own sense of humanity. She refused to watch him make the same mistake again. For a moment, Victor said nothing. The room grew so quiet that the sound of rain against the windows seemed almost deafening. Jack studied Victor carefully, searching for any sign that Nikki's words had reached him. Beneath the anger and pride, Jack knew Victor was still capable of reflection. Their rivalry had endured for so long precisely because both men understood each other better than they cared to admit. Billy, however, remained unconvinced that Victor would suddenly change course. He had seen too many of Victor's schemes to believe this confrontation would end peacefully. Billy demanded that Victor call off whatever plan he had set in motion outside the estate. If Victor had arranged legal or financial traps designed to crush Jack, they needed to stop immediately. Victor's response came slowly, measured with the precision of a man who had spent his life controlling every negotiation. He admitted that he had taken steps to ensure Jack could no longer interfere with NEWMAN Enterprises. Assets had been frozen, partnerships had been quietly redirected, and a series of legal maneuvers were already underway. But Victor insisted that everything he had done remained within the bounds of business strategy. Jack shook his head, clearly unconvinced. He argued that Victor's actions went beyond competition and into personal destruction. Destroying a rival's company might be ruthless, but Victor had gone further, targeting Jack's reputation, isolating his allies, and attempting to dismantle everything he had spent his life building. Nikki closed her eyes briefly as she absorbed the full weight of Victor's admission. Even if Victor believed his actions were justified, the damage was already spreading through Genoa City's corporate world. The conflict between NEWMAN Enterprises and Jabbo had escalated into a full-scale power struggle that threatened to pull countless employees, investors, and families into the fallout. Billy realized that stopping Victor tonight might not be enough. The machinery of Victor's plan had already been set in motion. Undoing it would require more than words. It would require Victor himself to step back from the brink. Billy's voice softened slightly as he addressed Victor again. He admitted that he had spent years blaming Victor for nearly every problem in his life. In many cases, Victor had deserved the blame. But tonight Billy wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting to prevent a disaster that would destroy both families. Jack looked at Billy with a hint of surprise. Their relationship had always been complicated, marked by rivalry and frustration, yet Billy's determination to protect him tonight spoke volumes. Victor, meanwhile, seemed caught between pride and reflection. The anger that had fueled his plan was still present, but Nikki's presence, and Billy's unexpected honesty, had clearly shaken his certainty. For the first time since the meeting began, Victor appeared to be reconsidering his next move. Nikki stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. She reminded Victor of the countless battles he had already won in his life. He had built one of the most powerful companies in the world and had overcome enemies far more dangerous than Jack Abbott. But true strength, she said, wasn't about destroying every rival. Sometimes it meant knowing when to stop. Victor looked at Nikki for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The storm outside intensified, thunder rolling across the sky as if echoing the turmoil inside his mind. Jack finally spoke again, his tone calmer than before. He admitted that he and Victor had pushed each other to extremes for years. Perhaps neither of them had been completely innocent in the endless cycle of retaliation. But continuing the feud at this level would only guarantee more destruction. Billy added that Genoa City had already suffered enough from their rivalry. Businesses had collapsed, relationships had been torn apart, and innocent people had been caught in the crossfire. If Victor truly believed he was protecting his family, he needed to consider what his actions were actually costing them. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Victor slowly walked toward the window, staring out at the rain-soaked grounds of the estate. His reflection in the glass looked like that of a man carrying decades of victories and regrets. Finally, Victor turned back toward the others. His voice was quieter now, though still firm with authority. He admitted that perhaps the situation had escalated further than he intended. The anger he felt toward Jack had clouded his judgment, pushing him toward decisions that might have consequences even he couldn't control. Nikki felt a small surge of relief hearing those words, though she knew Victor well enough to understand that admitting uncertainty was not the same as surrendering. Victor explained that the legal and financial actions against Jabbo could still be halted, if he chose to stop them. Doing so would require undoing weeks of planning and potentially sacrificing a strategic advantage he had worked hard to build. Billy didn't hesitate. He told Victor that the advantage wasn't worth the damage it would cause. Jack remained silent, waiting to see what Victor would decide. For several seconds, the room remained completely still. Then Victor reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and stared at the screen. The simple gesture carried enormous weight. One call could continue the attack on Jabbo. Another could stop it. Nikki held her breath. Victor slowly began dialing. No one spoke as the call connected. When Victor finally gave the order to suspend the operations against Jack's company, the tension in the room eased slightly, though the emotional aftermath remained heavy. When the call ended, Victor placed the phone back in his pocket and looked directly at Jack. The rivalry between them had not vanished, nor had the years of resentment. But for the first time that night, the possibility of stepping back from total war seemed real. Billy exhaled quietly, realizing how close they had come to a catastrophe that could have reshaped Genoa City forever. Nikki walked toward Victor, her expression filled with both relief and concern. She knew the decision he had just made had not been easy. Victor NEWMAN was not a man who retreated lightly. Outside, the storm slowly began to fade, the rain softening as if the world itself was calming after the confrontation. Yet even as the immediate crisis passed, everyone in the room understood one important truth. The rivalry between the NEWMANs and the Abbotts was far from over. But tonight, at least, they had stopped it from going too far. Rush cleric into surgery the moment the ambulance arrives. Word spread snappily through the medical staff, especially when Finn arrives moments latterly with Taylor Hayes. Indeed, though Finn works at the sanitarium, tonight he feels less like a croaker, and more like a son caught in agony. The knowledge that his own mama, Sheila Carter, pulled the detector weighs heavily on him. Taylor tries to stay calm and professional, but she cannot hide the deep sadness in her eyes. Deacon risked his life trying to stop Sheila, and now his survival depends on the skill of the surgeons. Meanwhile, the police station becomes the coming stage of the unfolding drama. Sheila sits in a cold interrogation room, gaping at the Essence table in front of her. For the first time in hours, the reality of her conduct completely settles into her mind. The adrenaline and rage that fueled the battle have fully faded, leaving only remorse and fear. She renewals the moment again and again, the argument, the gun, the unforeseen explosion of sound. She no way truly intended to shoot Cleric. In her mind, she had only wanted to scarify the people she believed were betraying her. But intentions mean nothing now. Investigators begin questioning her about the firing. They ask why she brought the gun.